Well, meanwhile, the United Nations has defended Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' attendance at that summit. This comes after sharp criticism from Ukraine's foreign ministry. That country, of course, is currently involved in active war with Russia.
The Secretary-General is attending the BRICS Summit, as he did previously in South Africa, and as he does as a standard practice in attending meetings of organizations with large numbers of important member states, such as the G7 and the G20. This is a meeting with great importance for the work of the United Nations, with the BRICS countries representing about half the world's population. And the Secretary-General will take the opportunity to hold a number of bilateral meetings with the leaders attending the summit. And regarding Ukraine and visits there, the Secretary-General does look forward to visiting Ukraine at a mutually convenient time, as previously discussed with President Zelensky in September when they met. Now, regarding what you said about the meeting with President Putin, the Secretary-General will reaffirm his well-known positions on the war in Ukraine and the conditions for a just peace based on the UN Charter, international law, and the resolutions of the United Nations. He will continue to pursue his efforts to reestablish safe navigation in the Black Sea, which is critically important for global food and energy security, especially for the most vulnerable countries around the world.
All right, let's make sense of all of these developments for you. Bring in our guest, Professor Christopher Isike is with the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria and joins us now via our video link. Prof, great to have you with us as always. Thanks very much indeed for your time and your patience. Perhaps let's start there. You know, this position of the United Nations Secretary-General and the decision to attend the summit. It's a difficult time to be leading the UN, isn't it? Because there's just so much on the go insofar as geopolitics are concerned. But I wonder if you reckon this will backfire. In other words, could Antonio Guterres' attendance here be seen as him potentially taking a side in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, thank you for having me and good to see you again. Not necessarily. Like his spokesperson said, the United Nations Secretary-General is a global diplomat. He is for everyone in the world. So his position is such that enables him to not see just black and white, but also gray lines in between. Who says that part of this is discussions with Putin would not be to try and urge him, to resolve this, peacefully. This is the role that he has to play, and if he had the power of enforcement, of course, he would be much more forceful. Right now, as it is, the best he can do is to talk to all sides, and the idea that he cannot talk to one side because the other side feel aggrieved is inconceivable.
Right. It also comes at a time, of course, where some people are suggesting Vladimir Putin has been completely isolated. I think it's safe to say so insofar as his interactions with the West are concerned. To what extent could Antonio Guterres' attendance in this summit, notwithstanding what they talk about, just his mere attendance, to what extent could that help ease that sense of isolation for Vladimir Putin, at least insofar as the world stage is concerned?
Well, you're correct. The optics may not look good for the West because then he would be seen as giving some kind of legitimacy and gravitas to Putin, and which is exactly what Putin wants to see. But besides the UN Secretary-General, let's not forget that over 30 countries are right now in Russia, and these countries constitute over 45% of the world's population, and we're talking about 3.6 billion people that these countries represent. So it's an important club, and the fact that all of these countries have converged in Russia to see him and to have him head a BRICS meeting is good for Putin. Maybe not so good for the Secretary-General if you look at the optics, but like I said, the Secretary-General's role is to use dialogue to try and bring peace and discuss important issues, especially where so many countries with such huge economic potentials are involved.
Right. The official word from the presidency, at least here in South Africa, is that the summit is more about bringing together countries with common economic, social, even political interests, as opposed to it being an anti-West type of gathering. I wonder to what extent you agree with the de facto kind of motive for a summit like this, because we've heard in many instances, at least in the commentary, that BRICS is really more about shifting the center of power in the world and less about what the presidency might want us to believe, which is these countries with a common interest just getting together and pushing their own agenda. Perhaps it could be both.
Exactly, it could be both, and I think that there's nothing wrong in doing both. The idea, like I said, of delineating between black and white, it's absurd. Countries interact with different countries or groups based on their national interests. There is nothing wrong in South Africa, for example, hobnobbing with the West and also doing the same with the East, if you want to call China and Russia that. The most important thing would be, is South Africa's interest, is South Africa's bread being buttered in the way it calibrates this relationship. India does this very well. Turkey now is seeking to do this. It has applied to join the BRICS, and it will be the first NATO country to join the BRICS. And it has stated quite clearly that the intention here is to be able to maintain connections with the West while also, desiring the flexibility to engage with other regions. So there's no reason why South Africa should not do that, do the same, so long as it puts its economic and national and political interest ahead of any kind of, sentimental or economic attachment.
That's interesting. Of course, there's all manner of discussions around what is likely to top the agenda of the summit, at least the main discussions that take place. We know there's issues around trade, security, the economy, of course. But there's also been a lot of speculation around, this concept of de-dollarization. These countries essentially pushing for any one of their own currencies to be used for these international transactions as opposed to the dollar. How much attention do you reckon that specific issue is likely to get, at least for this summit?
Oh, I think it's one of the big issues here, apart from the, the prospect of new members being admitted into the BRICS. I think the one big issue is the one of de-dollarization, like you put it, and President Putin has already outlined a very ambitious proposal, to build a new global financial payment system that will help to reduce America's dominance of global finance, and then also, of course, protect Russia and countries like Iran, from sanctions. And this system, which Russia calls BRICS Bridge, is intended to be built within a year, and would allow countries to conduct, cross-border settlement using digital platforms run by central banks of different countries. This is huge if it works. Of course, it has its challenges, but it is a big highlight of this particular BRICS summit.
Fair enough. South Africa, of course, said to deliver their country statement today from the president, that's Cyril Ramaphosa, who's attending this particular gathering. What should he say? And I'm asking this question keeping in mind two very important things. The first is South Africa is typically seen as being best placed to drive the Africa agenda, even on these kind of multilateral platforms, for lack of a better term. The second issue I'm keeping in mind is the fact that, the G20 presidency is also heading to South Africa from December. And I have no doubt that is playing very prominently in the president's mind.
Oh, absolutely. South Africa's foreign policy is becoming Afrocentric in terms of placing Africa at the center of its foreign policy, besides looking after its national interests, of course. Like you highlighted, South Africa has played a very important role in representing, articulating, and presenting the African interest at these forums. And its leadership of the G20, hosting the G20 summit next year, is also something that will play in the mind of President Ramaphosa as he engages with not just Putin, but different countries that are also members of the G20, by the way, that are also part of the BRICS. So yes, South Africa needs to position itself as one that is articulating an African interest, also bearing in mind that there are now calls for African representation in the UN Security Council, and South Africa is in pole position to be one of those countries if we get get to more than one African country in that seat. So these are important opportunities for South Africa to showcase its leadership ability and gravitas, which will help the African cause.
Sure. All very interesting indeed, and we'll see how much really changes after the summit. But for now, Professor Christopher Isike, always great speaking to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Professor Isike is with the Political Sciences Department at the University of Pretoria.